Hello and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 17, Putting the Muge in Mugic. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in with the episode summary. The boys are on a scan quest because Peyton saw Prince Mudino and his forces heading towards the overworld territory, and they wanted to see if they could get any cool scans. They run into the Mepedian forces and get shot at, and escape, and then they find the overworld camp with Arius, Atacat, Victar, Gatarin, and more. Tangoth Toporn returns from talks with Prince Mudinu, unsuccessful. Mudinu wants to claim the Broken Edge territory for the Mepedians, even though it has been neutral territory. Maxor wants Tangoth Toporn to reach some kind of agreement, but the Overworlders want to fight. Hune Marquard says that he made a new Mugic that intensifies power and speed. Nadrin doubts Hune, but Tangoth decides to use the Mugic on his troops and go to battle. The Overworlders win the initial battle, and Tom ports out to go to his match. In his match, he uses Hune's Mugic, and it works, but after the first 3 battles, it drained his creatures of power and speed. He forfeits his match to go warn the Overworld troops and alert Nadrin. Tom brings Nadrin's new Mugic to Broken Edge, but can't get it to the Overworlders in time, so he tricks a Mepedian to cast the Mugic to heal the Overworlders. The Overworlders then rebound and run off the Mepedians, and Tangoth Toporn says that he made a mistake ignoring Nadrin's advice and going into battle. Nadrin then assures him that he can learn from his mistakes. On to analysis. This episode gives us a lot of insight on the Mepedian Overworld border relations, if you will. We learn that both Overworlders and Mepedians claim the Broken Edge territory, so it must have been deemed neutral territory between the tribes at some point. And yet now Mudinu wants to claim that territory for the Mepedians, specifically to create more of like a hard border between the tribes, get rid of this neutral territory and make like, this is ours, create a harder border. And this is not a conflict that Maxor is attending, so he is delegating the responsibility to Tangoth Toporn to lead these negotiations. And Mudino is willing to talk, or at least appear that he's willing to talk. He's willing to engage with the peace negotiations before combat. And so this kind of plays into each tribe's general strategy of the overworld government with Maxor is specifically striving to gain peace, like treaties, and use peace to gain power, if you will, whereas the Mepedians deal in more deception to gain power. Tangoth Toporn strays from Maxor's and Nadrin's wishes to remain peaceful when he leads his troops into battle. And Nadrin has some good advice in this episode of, you can't lose a battle you don't start, right? So if there's not a battle, the Overworlders can't lose. But if there is one, 50-50, Overworlders win, Overworlders lose. Like on the flip side of that, if there's no battle, the Mepedians can't win. You know, they can't claim the territory if there's no battle. And yet, if there is one, they have a chance to, get Broken Edge. Whereas, peace negotiations, a compromise, both sides would be able to win together without a battle, even if they both aren't completely satisfied in a compromise, right? They would both leave the table at least feeling confident that their voices were heard. Now, back to the point that Prince Mudinu at least appeared to engage in peace negotiations. He did, right? He met with Tangoth Toporn, but like we don't know, because the events didn't plan out that way, of if Tangoth Toporn was pushing peace, if the Mepedians would have attacked anyways, right? It seems like that might have been their plan of use the invisibility to get an upper hand, but that's the overworld can't claim to be an aggressor if they don't aggress. But here they did, right? The overworld troops really seemed like they wanted to go to battle, and that kind of peer pressured Tangoth into doing that, right? And that's where we like pull the lesson of this episode from. Tangoth says that he failed as a leader, and he made the wrong choice, which is good for him to like admit when you're wrong. He's feeling emotional, he's sharing his emotions. And Nadrin says every leader fails, but the great ones learn from their mistakes. And so we can pull out the lesson of like, learn from your mistakes because mistakes are inevitable and that's how you grow. But also, This adds to one of the broader themes of Chaotic, that like violence is usually not the most effective problem-solving mechanic, and Tanith Toborn chooses to go into battle. And they would have lost the battle without intervention, and that's like a narrative consequence for choosing violence, right? He chose to initiate this battle, he chose to be the aggressor, and the narrative consequence for that is he would have lost the battle without Tom's interference, intervening, if you will. And so Tanith was like peer pressured into making this decision, right? The soldiers wanted to fight, and Hune's Mugic gave them the confidence boost to do so. But Tanith's instinct was to keep the peace. It was to appease Maxor and Nadrin. It was to, he seemed unsure about the decision, but the Mugic gave him that extra boost of like, okay, we'll do it. And so that could be another lesson that we're pulling out of here is like trust your gut, trust your instincts. Tanith being the leader, his instinct was to be peaceful, but he went against that because of the peers surrounding him. Additionally, at the end of this episode, Nadrin adds, the overworld needs you to face the dangers ahead and conquer them. Maxwell believes in you, so do I. And this does multiple things. It establishes Tanith Toborn as a character. Right up until this point, we've only seen him in Param twice, and that was once when he was sick taking a nap, and once during Kaor's Commandos episode, where, he was being noble and true and let the humans wander free in Kiru City and was like proving him to be a good warrior. But in this episode, we really get to know Tangus Toborn's character, and this episode really solidifies where he is on the journey, right? He's a good-hearted leader who just wants to do good, and he feels ashamed that he lets other people down, and he made a bad call, and he expresses that. And it shows that Tangus Toborn is at the start of his leadership journey. He's at the beginning. We're establishing a baseline in this episode for him to grow on, right? This is his first opportunity to like show off his leadership skills, and he fumbles that. And so it gives us a place to grow from. And then Nadrin's advice also gives us, right, we assume that Nadrin knows about the Marillions at this point because Tom went to Maxor to warn him that like the doors of the deep mines have been open. And, Nadrin is Maxor's advisor. It just makes sense that he would be in that information chain. And so when Nadrin says that there are dangers ahead, he's pointing specifically to the dangers that, they're trying to prime Tangus Toborn to be ready to handle, and that is the Marillions. Whatever happens with the Marillions, they need people to be ready. And so they're giving Tangus Toborn this opportunity because, it's better to learn when you're not being thrown in the deep end. Like, sure, that's one way to do it, but they're trying to have him be prepared so that when the time comes, he is prepared. He is ready. And I think this, the pressure of like Maxwell believes in you and so do I from Nadrin, I think it also instills this sense of responsibility into Tanith that, people are going to rely on him and he has to be ready for when that time comes, right? If he needs to make hard decisions as a leader, if he needs to do other things that come with that leadership call, make hard decisions, or like really motivate his team, he has to be ready to do that. And they need to be ready to rely on him because he's trusted and tried and true, and he has practice. So this episode is really a starting place. We're starting Tangus' leadership career, and we're giving it a place to grow. And so whatever happens ahead, we can look back to this as a starting point. Now, onto lore. Tanith Toborn's unit consists of Atakat, Arius, Victar, Katarin, and of course himself, Tanith Toborn, along with Hugh Marquard, who is a Muge, and then also they have some generic overworld soldiers. So Nadrin stops by, but he doesn't seem to be a permanent member of this unit. But I do think it's interesting that they have 6 overworld creatures here, and it consists of 5 warriors and a Muge, which is like a decent strategy to building a deck. Like if you were creating a chaotic deck to play within cards, put your warriors up front and put your Muge in the back. That's one strategy that, this show, they call it a classic strategy. It's like what Codemaster Krellin did back in when they were teaching us strategy. Have your warriors up front, Muge in the back. And that's what they're doing, but like in practice here. They're having their warriors on the front lines, and then they're having Muge, Hugh, and Marquard backing them up with his creations. And I do think it's important that in this episode they're establishing that these characters are working together for oncoming plot lines. Like when things unfold and more things happen, it's nice that they're establishing that like this is a team that's worked together and has history, and it's good that we see that now. I also think it's funny that like this battalion, if you will, is like just cats, rams, and a bear. You know, it's like you have two cats, Tangeth and Atacat. You got two rams, Arius and Katarin, and then a bear, Victar. You know, and then Hugh Markard is a bug, but do we really count him because he's annoying and just causes problems, right? He's probably booted out after this episode, I would assume, right? He did not improve himself. And of course, Hugh Marquand gives us the lore of like he was a student at the Muge Academy in Curious City, and part of that system teaches you how to make new Mugic. We also see Nadrin doing research developing Mugic with books swirling around him. And so I think it's telling us that there is a cost to Mugic, right? Mugic is not this like limitless power source. It's not unearned power. Specifically, you know, there's a give and a take of like they got more power and speed, but then they had to give it up later. And in crafting, you know, this type of thing, Nadrin said he tried before and failed because it, you know, it doesn't work. And so we get a little insight onto that and also into the Muge Academy. Like Hugh Marquand was a student and he graduated and he had a cohort of people that he worked with to develop this music. And I think the final piece of lore we get in this episode is we get the lore over the border dispute, which we already talked about, like the Broken Edge being neutral territory, and now the Mepedians are claiming it, and the political ramifications of that are unknown at this point, right? Having this neutral territory is interesting for a lot of reasons, but then also Mudino's grab for power here to create more of a hard border is also interesting, and I think has some ramifications. But, you know, at the end of this episode, he does fail, and it remains neutral territory, if not claimed for the overworld. On to fun facts and other notes. On the menu today, we have popsicles, specifically in blue, pink, and yellow. And this episode, I think, shows a benefit to this animation style. There is this funny, expressive animation with the tree branch gag at the beginning of the episode, and I think it plays into the benefits of this animation style, which is exaggeration, and you can have the characters more easily emote because you're able to stylize for effect. The next thing I have is a comment on the battle, which is, why did nary a creature have spectral viewers at the Mepedian border conflict? Did we think about this? Mepedian's whole thing is that they turn invisible. Right, that's their whole thing. That's their whole shtick. It seems like common sense to bring spectral viewers when you're going to fight the Mepedians. Right, because the Overworlders were like caught off guard when they went invisible, and it's like that's their whole thing. That's their like be familiar with their work, please. You know, they are famous for invisibility, and you're gonna go there unprepared, right? Why not even one pair? Like I think every single warrior should have one. There should be at least 10 so that you have backup. But nobody's nope. Okay. And so I'm like, what are you doing, Tangus Toborn? Fail as a leader going into battle? No, fail as a leader as not being prepared with the proper gear. Like, please plan ahead next time. My next note in fun facts and other notes is Tom has a French opponent in the Drome, which is fun and shows worldwide diversity at Chaotic. But watching this, it just felt so random that like, oh, he's French, and like we didn't really touch on it. But the French accent carries over from him talking as a human to the creatures in the Drome, and I think that's funny. Like, I guess it makes sense that if that's the way you talk as a human, that's the way that you would talk when you are a creature. But having a French accent in the Drome is kind of funny. Now, I do also want to note that Tom forfeits this match, which is at least the second time he's forfeit this season. Like, he forfeit in the Rasmus episode because it's just so pressing that he has to warn the creatures in Chaotic. And this season seems a lot less focused on the drone matches and a lot more focused on Param, which I do think is true. Like, this is a lot more Param focused season. But at what cost to the battles? You know, that's something I'm thinking about and grappling with. of this battle got cut short because he forfeit, and a lot of the other episodes are either just one battle or they don't really show us the progression. And so I think it's interesting to note that season 2 is a lot more Param focused, and that, you know, Tom's got places to be. He has to warn the creatures. He has to warn the cats and ram and bear. One last thing is that when Tom goes yelling for Nadrin outside his doors, it parallels, I think the episode was Fear Fright in season 1, which was the last time that Tom really had pressing news for Nadrin, because I think he learned that you can't just knock and walk inside Nadrin's house because it's booby trapped. And so now whenever he needs Nadrin, he just yells. He just goes to Kenepo and yells. And it seems to work, but Nadrin, you gotta have a doorbell or something. There's gotta be a way for Tom to contact you that's not just hootin' and hollerin' in the town square outside your castle. But I digress. My final thoughts on this episode are I like this episode. There's definitely more to dig into than appears on the surface, and it's a pretty standard chaotic format of there's a scan quest and there's a match, and we learn something in one that affects the other, right? There's the scan quest, and then they get the Mugic, and then Tom uses the Mugic and learns its effects and goes back and helps the creatures, right? Pretty standard, and I like that the plots are intertwined. And I do like that this episode does dig more into political side of Param. I always do like when we get to see the more political side of Param, and with this border dispute, they don't really dive into it, but it's hinted at. You get some information, and what you can extrapolate from that is interesting. And this is the first time we get to see Tanith shine as a creature that's not just a creature in the battle drum. This is the first time we get to see him shine for the first time as himself in Param, which even at this point it feels like we've known him for so long because we've seen him in the drum so many times. He is just one of those go-to creatures, and I think that goes to show the parasocial relationships can happen in Chaotic too, because Tom uses Tangus Toborn all the time, and so it feels like we know him, but this is really only the second time he gets to be shown off. On the flip side of Tanguth, Hugh Marquard, there's just something about him. I don't know if it's his voice or if it's character design or what, but he's annoying to me, and it's probably just because he causes problems for no reason. And this episode solidifies that you can really always trust Nadrin because he's rarely wrong. And Hugh Marquard challenges him, and it's who are you to go against Nadrin? You know, please. And so something about him. And then this episode is also a break, on the grander scale, from the ramp up of the Marillion invasion. And it feels odd narratively if we just had these two big episodes of the Doors of the Deep Mines opening, and we had the newbie episode where we get to see Milaine in the lava pond, right? And so we're ramping things up, but we have a convenient break here of this doesn't really address Marillions at all. And so it feels odd in the overarching story, but I think chronologically it makes sense, right? Chronologically, in Tanguth Toborn's journey, it makes sense that this happens after the doors are open, that he really starts to step up as a leader and get that experience. And so from a narrative perspective, I feel like it feels odd to be placed in the middle of the rising action of the Marillion invasion, but chronologically it makes sense to me. So all in all, I like this episode. I think it's good. I think it's solid. It's entertaining. It's insightful, and it's just solid chaotic. If you want to see chaotic, you want to watch this episode, and that's what I think. So let me know what you think, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.